Something is accelerating, and most people feel it even if they can't explain it. Time feels compressed. Weeks blur into days. Decisions are rushed. Reactions replace reflection. Life feels like it's moving faster than your ability to stay oriented within it. This isn't just stress or modern busyness. It's perception struggling to keep pace with change. When reality shifts gradually, the mind adapts. But when change accelerates, perception lags behind, and that lag creates confusion, anxiety, and a sense that the ground is no longer stable beneath your feet. People often assume that reality changes suddenly, dramatically, through obvious events. But real shifts don't announce themselves that way. They arrive quietly, through altered pace, through pressure, through speed. When things move faster than awareness can process, meaning collapses, you're still functioning, still responding, still moving, but you're no longer fully present. And that absence of presence is the first sign that something deeper is happening. Acceleration doesn't just affect schedules, it affects thought. You think faster but less deeply. You decide quicker but with less clarity. Attention jumps constantly, never settling long enough to integrate experience. This is why people feel exhausted even when nothing obvious is wrong. It's not physical fatigue, it's perceptual overload. The mind is trying to keep up with a rate of change. It was never designed to sustain. This acceleration also changes how reality feels emotionally. Events feel heavier, choices feel urgent. Everything carries an unspoken pressure to respond immediately. But urgency is not the same as importance. Urgency, short-circuit, discernment, it forces reaction before understanding. And when reaction becomes habitual, awareness falls behind entirely. Most people mistake this sensation for personal failure. They assume they're losing focus, discipline, or resilience. But the experience is collective. It's happening everywhere, across cultures and generations. And that tells us something important. This is not about individual weakness. It's about environmental conditions, shaping perception itself. Acceleration benefits systems, not people. Systems function best when speed replaces reflection, when decisions are made quickly, not carefully, when reactions can be predicted, when attention is fragmented. In such conditions, people don't stop to question direction. They focus on keeping up. And keeping up feels like survival. The danger is not that reality is changing. It always has. The danger is that awareness may no longer be keeping pace. When perception lags behind change, people experience reality as hostile, confusing, or overwhelming. They don't see patterns. They feel pressure. They don't understand shifts. They react to them. And reaction without understanding is where control becomes effortless. This is why delay feels tempting right now. Slowing down feels irresponsible. Pausing feels risky. Reflection feels like a luxury you can't afford. But that instinct is backwards. When things accelerate, the ability to pause becomes more important, not less. Without it, perception fractures completely. If this resonates, it's because you've noticed the acceleration. You've felt the compression. The sense that waiting to understand things later may no longer work. That postponement carries a cost. Not dramatic, not catastrophic, but cumulative. Each moment awareness fails to engage, perception falls a little further behind. This is why this message matters now. not because of fear, not because of prediction, but because awareness has a pace. When reality shifts faster than awareness adapts, clarity is lost. And clarity is what allows you to move through change without being consumed by it. You are not being told what is coming, you are being invited to notice what is already happening. The acceleration is not external alone, it's internal. It's how experience is being processed. And if you don't adjust how you meet it, reality will feel increasingly alien, not because it has turned against you, but because you are no longer meeting it fully. This chapter is not a warning of collapse. It's a recognition of speed. And recognition is the first step toward regaining balance. Because the shift itself is not the danger. Falling behind it is. Reality rarely changes in the way people expect. It doesn't collapse in a single moment or transform with a dramatic announcement. What shifts first and often unnoticed is perception. The world can look the same while being experienced completely differently, and that difference is everything. When perception lags behind change, people don't say reality has shifted. They say, I feel lost, I feel anxious, nothing makes sense anymore. The discomfort is interpreted as personal, but its source is collective. It's the result of awareness falling behind the pace at which experience is being presented. Perception is not passive. It's an active process that requires time, attention, and integration. When life speeds up, perception is forced to skim rather than settle. You still see events, hear explanations, and receive information, but meaning doesn't form, connections don't solidify, understanding becomes fragmented. And when understanding fragments, people fill the gaps with assumptions, shortcuts, and borrowed narratives. That's when reality begins to feel distorted, not because it has changed overnight, but because perception can no longer assemble it coherently. This is why so many people miss shifts until they are already embedded within them. They look back and say, when did this become normal? Or how did we get here? The answer is almost always the same, gradually, while attention was elsewhere. Perception doesn't announce when it's falling behind. It simply adapts by simplifying. Complexity becomes overwhelming, so it's reduced. Nuance becomes exhausting, so it's ignored. Speed becomes the default, not because it's better, but because it's demanded. The danger of this adaptation is subtle. When perception simplifies, reality feels harsher. People polarize more quickly. Certainty replaces curiosity. Emotional reactions intensify because there's no time to process them. In this state, individuals feel as though reality itself has turned against them, when in fact their capacity to perceive it fully has been compromised. The world hasn't necessarily become more extreme. Perception has become narrower. This narrowing benefits systems that depend on predictability. A mind that reacts quickly is easier to anticipate than one that reflects. A population that experiences reality in fragments is less likely to see patterns. When perception is rushed, people respond to events instead of understanding processes. They argue about outcomes while missing causes. They chase explanations that promise relief rather than insight. What makes this moment critical is that perception has limits. It can stretch to meet change, but only if attention is reclaimed. Without that reclamation, the gap widens. Reality feels increasingly alien. People describe a sense of dislocation as if they're watching events unfold without being fully present within them. This isn't dissociation in a clinical sense, it's perceptual drift. Awareness is no longer synchronized with experience. This is also why denial is not the primary problem. Many people sense the shift. They feel the acceleration. They notice the instability. But sensing is not the same as understanding. Without time to integrate, perception defaults to coping mechanisms: distraction, certainty, identity, outrage. These responses feel active, but they don't restore clarity. They manage discomfort while allowing the underlying drift to continue. Reality doesn't require belief to exist, but understanding it requires presence. When presence diminishes, reality feels more threatening. Not because danger has increased, but because comprehension has decreased. This is why slowing attention is not avoidance, it's alignment. It allows perception to catch up. It restores the ability to see relationships rather than isolated events. If this resonates, it's because you've noticed the mismatch. The sense that explanations are everywhere, yet understanding is scarce. That information flows constantly, yet clarity feels rare. This is the signature of perception lag. And it's reversible not through force or urgency, but through deliberate attention. You don't need to escape change, you need to meet it. And meeting it requires time. Time reclaimed from reaction, distraction, and speed. This chapter isn't telling you that reality is unstable. It's telling you that perception must be stabilized to experience it clearly. Because when perception catches up, the world doesn't suddenly become simple, but it becomes coherent again. And coherence is what allows you to move through change without being overwhelmed by it. The greatest danger during periods of rapid change is not ignorance, resistance, or even deception. It is delay. Delay feels harmless, reasonable, even responsible. I'll look into it later. I'll think about it when things calm down. This isn't the right moment. These thoughts don't feel like avoidance. They feel practical. And that is precisely why delay is so effective. It doesn't confront awareness, it slowly starves it. Most people don't turn away from truth. They postpone engagement with it. And postponement has a unique effect on perception. When insight is delayed, it doesn't remain neutral. It weakens. The initial clarity fades. The question that felt important loses urgency. The moment passes, and with it, the specific conditions that allowed awareness to surface in the first place. When people return later, they often find that the same idea no longer resonates. Not because it was wrong, but because the window has narrowed. Delay works because life is always demanding attention elsewhere. There is never a perfect time to pause, reflect, or question deeply. Responsibilities continue. Distractions multiply. Urgencies compete. And so waiting feels justified, but waiting has direction. It always moves awareness forward in time, away from the present moment where clarity arises. Insight does not live in later. It appears in pauses that exist only now. This is why delay is different from skepticism. Skepticism engages, delay disengages. Skepticism still pays attention, delay looks away, and once attention looks away repeatedly, it becomes a habit. The mind learns that depth can be deferred. Over time, it stops presenting depth at all. Delay also disguises itself as patience. But patience is active. Delay is passive. Patience stays present without forcing outcome. Delay withdraws attention while telling itself it will return. In practice, it rarely does. The nervous system adapts to speed. Stillness feels uncomfortable. Reflection feels inefficient. The mind becomes optimized for movement, not meaning. In periods when reality is shifting quickly, delay becomes especially costly. When change accelerates, perception must engage earlier, not later. If you wait until change is obvious, perception is already behind. You are reacting to consequences rather than understanding causes. This is when people say they feel blindsided, overwhelmed, or confused by developments they never saw coming, even though the signs were present all along. Delay also creates dependency. When individuals don't trust themselves to engage early, they rely on external explanations once events are already in motion. Authority fills the gap. Narratives arrive pre-packaged. Meaning is supplied rather than discovered. This doesn't happen because people are weak. It happens because delay erodes confidence in one's own perception. The uncomfortable truth is that clarity has timing, not in a mystical sense, but in a psychological one. Awareness requires certain conditions: space, attention, openness. Those conditions are fleeting in a world built on speed. When they appear and are ignored, they don't always return in the same form. The next opportunity often requires more effort, more disruption, more discomfort to break through accumulated habit. This is why so many people look back and say, I wish I'd paid attention earlier. Not because they lacked information, but because they delayed engagement. The cost of delay is not immediate loss, it is gradual dulling. Insight becomes harder to access. Curiosity weakens. Questions feel heavier, and by the time awareness feels urgent again, the environment is louder, faster, and more demanding than before. This chapter is not calling for haste or impulsive action. It is calling for presence. Presence is the opposite of delay. Presence meets what is available now without insisting on certainty. It doesn't rush to conclusions, but it doesn't look away either. Presence allows perception to stay synchronized with change. If you are hearing this and it resonates, it's because delay has not yet taken full hold. You are still capable of noticing the impulse to postpone. That noticing is crucial. Once delay becomes automatic, awareness no longer questions it. It simply follows. Reality does not punish delay. It adapts around it. An adaptation without awareness leads to living in a world that feels increasingly unfamiliar, not because it transforms suddenly, but because perception never fully engaged with the transformation as it happened. Delay is the real danger, not because something terrible will occur, but because understanding will arrive too late to feel like understanding at all. And that leads directly to the next layer. Why speed itself benefits certain systems, and who gains when people can't afford to slow down. Speed is often celebrated as progress, efficiency, and innovation, but speed also has a lesser-known function. It prevents understanding. When everything moves quickly, There is no time to integrate experience, to question direction, or to notice patterns forming beneath the surface. This is why speed is not neutral. It shapes perception, and when perception is shaped by speed, it becomes easier to manage, predict, and steer. Systems thrive on speed because speed fragments attention. Fragmented attention cannot see wholes. It only reacts to parts. When people are rushed, they respond to what is immediate rather than what is meaningful. They deal with symptoms instead of causes. They accept explanations that feel fast and complete rather than ones that require patience and reflection. Speed compresses complexity into slogans, narratives, and binary choices. And complexity is the natural enemy of manipulation. Consider how quickly situations now demand response. Opinions are expected immediately. Positions must be taken before understanding has time to form. Silence is interpreted as ignorance or weakness. This pressure trains people to prioritize reaction over reflection. Over time, reflection begins to feel irresponsible, even dangerous. Speed becomes synonymous with competence. Slowness is reframed as failure. This benefits systems that require compliance without comprehension. A population that is always catching up does not have the luxury of asking foundational questions. It focuses on survival within the system rather than examination of the system itself. Keeping up becomes the goal. Direction becomes secondary. Speed also dissolves accountability. When events move quickly, consequences are harder to trace. Decisions are justified as necessary responses to urgency. Mistakes are buried under the next development. Patterns disappear beneath motion. In a fast-moving environment, memory weakens not because people forget facts, but because experiences are never fully processed. Without processing, learning stalls. This is why speed is paired so effectively with overload. It's not enough to move quickly, there must also be too much to process. When information arrives faster than it can be understood, people default to trust. Trust in authority, trust in consensus, trust in whatever feels most stable in the moment. Overload doesn't inform, it exhausts. Exhaustion leads to dependence. Notice how often clarity is postponed with phrases like, "We'll understand later," or "We'll see how this unfolds." These are not unreasonable statements, but when repeated endlessly in a fast-moving environment, they become mechanisms of surrender. Understanding is always deferred to a future that never arrives because speed never relents. The systems that benefit from speed do not need to be coordinated consciously. They reinforce each other naturally. Media accelerates to capture attention. Technology accelerates to optimize engagement. Institutions accelerate to maintain relevance. Each layer amplifies the next. No single entity needs to control the whole. The structure sustains itself because speed is rewarded everywhere. The personal cost of this environment is subtle but profound. People begin to feel that slowing down is a risk, that pausing will cause them to fall behind, that taking time to understand will leave them excluded or irrelevant. This fear keeps attention locked into motion, and motion keeps awareness shallow. The irony is that speed creates fragility. Systems that move too quickly become brittle. They cannot adapt thoughtfully because adaptation requires awareness. When change arrives faster than understanding, systems rely on force, repetition, or authority to maintain coherence. Individuals within them feel increasing pressure, decreasing clarity, and growing dependence. This chapter is not an argument against progress or technology. It is an observation about rhythm. Awareness has a rhythm. It requires pauses. It needs space to integrate. When speed dominates without interruption, awareness is crowded out. And when awareness is crowded out, perception becomes reactive rather than discerning. You may have noticed that when you slow down, even briefly, things begin to make more sense. Connections appear. Emotions settle. Questions refine themselves. This is not imagination. It is perception catching up. Speed steals that possibility. If reality is shifting faster than you think, then slowing attention is not avoidance, it is alignment. It is the only way perception can keep pace without fracturing. Systems that benefit from speed do not encourage this. They cannot. Because once people slow enough to see patterns, speed loses its power to confuse. This realization is not meant to provoke suspicion. It is meant to restore agency. You cannot control how fast the world moves, but you can control how you meet its speed. And that choice between reaction and observation is where clarity either returns or continues to slip away. Which brings us to the next chapter. What happens when awareness falls too far behind the pace of change, and why the cost is not immediate but cumulative? Another consequence is emotional volatility. When perception cannot integrate experience, emotions accumulate without resolution. Anxiety increases. Irritation becomes common. Outrage feels cathartic because it provides release without understanding. People swing between urgency and exhaustion, intensity and numbness. This volatility is not a character flaw. It is the nervous system responding to sustained overload without sufficient time to process. Memory also changes. Experiences are remembered as impressions rather than insights. Lessons are repeated because they were never fully absorbed. Time feels compressed because nothing settles. Without integration, life feels like it is rushing forward while you remain slightly behind, always adjusting, never fully present. This creates a quiet sense of alienation, not from others, but from one's own experience. Importantly, when awareness lags too far, truth does not disappear. It becomes irrelevant, not false, but irrelevant. People stop asking whether something is true and start asking whether it is useful, popular, or emotionally satisfying. Truth that requires patience feels inaccessible. Subtlety feels impractical. And in that environment, perception is easily guided by whatever offers immediate relief from confusion. This is how reality begins to feel hostile. Not because it is, but because understanding has fallen behind it. The world appears unpredictable, overwhelming, and unstable. People seek control where understanding is needed. They tighten routines, defend identities, cling to explanations that promise certainty. These strategies feel protective, but they further narrow perception, deepening the lag. The most dangerous aspect of this state is that it feels normal. Everyone else seems to be coping the same way. Speed is celebrated, exhaustion is shared, shallow engagement is rewarded. There is no obvious signal that something essential has been lost, and because the loss is collective, it is rarely questioned. Reversing this drift becomes harder the longer it continues. Not impossible, but resisted. Slowing down feels risky, reflection feels indulgent, stillness feels uncomfortable. The nervous system, adapted to constant stimulation, interprets quiet as threat. And so people avoid the very conditions that would restore awareness. This chapter is not a warning of collapse. It is an observation of consequence. Awareness, like any capacity, weakens when unused. The cost of lag is not punishment. It is diminished experience. Life becomes narrower. Choices feel constrained. Understanding feels out of reach. If this resonates, it is because awareness has not fully lagged for you. There is still recognition, still the ability to sense that something is off, not catastrophically, but meaningfully. That recognition matters. It is the signal that perception can still catch up, because awareness does not need to outrun change. It only needs to meet it. And meeting it requires one thing that speed tries hardest to take away: time to see clearly. That is why the final chapter matters not as a solution, but as a return. A return to the only advantage that has ever allowed humans to navigate change without losing themselves: deliberate attention. The systems that benefit from speed cannot prevent this. They can compete for attention, but they cannot force presence away once it is chosen. Presence is not something you need permission for. It does not require agreement or belief. It simply requires that you notice where your attention goes and choose again and again to bring it back. Keeping up also means accepting uncertainty without panic. When awareness is present, uncertainty does not feel threatening. It feels open. You no longer rush to close questions prematurely. You can live with not knowing while still seeing clearly. This capacity is essential during periods of rapid change. Certainty becomes brittle when reality is fluid. Awareness remains flexible. You may notice that when you slow attention, emotions settle. Not because circumstances improve, but because the nervous system finally has time to process. Anxiety loses intensity. Outrage loses momentum. Fear loses its grip. This does not make you passive. It makes you precise. You act when action is appropriate, not when reaction is provoked. Keeping up is also about rhythm. Awareness needs cycles of engagement and rest. When rest is removed, engagement becomes frantic. When engagement is constant, rest feels impossible. Restoring rhythm through pauses, quiet moments, reflection allows perception to recalibrate. This is not indulgence. It is maintenance. Nothing in this chapter asks you to reject the world or fear the future. It asks you to meet change with the one capacity that has always allowed humans to adapt without losing themselves: deliberate attention. When attention is deliberate, reality makes sense, even when it is difficult. When attention is scattered, reality feels hostile, even when it is not. If you have felt the acceleration, if you have sensed that waiting or delaying understanding no longer works, then this is your leverage point. Not urgency, not panic attention, the moment you choose presence. You stop falling behind. You may not be ahead, but you are aligned, and alignment is enough. This is why the message is simple. Don't delay awareness. Not because time is running out in some dramatic sense, but because perception needs to stay engaged, to remain clear. The shift does not require you to do more. It requires you to see more clearly. Reality will continue to move quickly. That is not within your control. What is within your control is how you meet it. Reaction will always lag. Presence keeps pace. And that is the only way to keep up